you so much, Allison. And thank you to everybody who's tuning in for this Zoom artist talk. We're sure that you have seen a lot of Zooms lately, and we know that Zoom fatigue is real. So we really do appreciate everybody taking time out of their Monday to learn a little bit more about Jeffrey's work and practice as an artist. I would like to take a moment to introduce Jeffrey. He is a multidisciplinary artist working in painting, printmaking, sculpture, beadwork, installation, and performance. Gibson earned his MA in painting at the Royal College of Art in London and a BFA in painting from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Gibson's artwork engages with his Indigenous heritage, queer histories, popular culture, and his own life experience in his practice. His work is in so many prominent collections, including the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, the Denver Art Museum, and the National Gallery of Canada at Ottawa. His work has been exhibited at the New Museum, the Wellin Museum of Art at Hamilton College, the Brooklyn Museum, and the Site Santa Fe Biennial. His awards include the Joan Mitchell Foundation Painters and Sculptors Grant and the MacArthur Fellowship. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, what I thought we would do is you've been so gracious to provide us some images of your work. So I thought we could take a few moments to familiarize our audience who may be new to your practice and go through some of those images and then have a discussion post. Does that sound all right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So just let me know when you want me to advance the slides.
Okay. Do you want me to talk while we're going through them?
That'd be wonderful.
Okay. So thank you for everybody coming and joining us today. And let me see what we're gonna. Are you presenting?
Can you see my screen or no?
Can't see.
Huh.
It does say I'm viewing Erin Joyce's screen, but
Oh, Allison, can other people see my screen or? Just make sure that everyone's able to view this. Should be. We can always start over.
I can. Oh, let me see. Okay, hold on. Oh wait, there we go. Okay.
Oh, okay, perfect. It's like, oh no.
I apologize.
Okay.
No
worries.
Well, thank you all for being here. And thank you to the herd and to Erin. This first piece here, actually the image that you're looking at is an installation shot of the show that's currently at the Brooklyn Museum, which is titled "When Fire is Applied to a Stone, It Cracks." And this exhibition was more of a project to show my own work side by side with some pieces from their permanent collection of materials and techniques that have really taught me and inspired me in my own work. So, and then we also had another gallery, which is more of a research gallery. The piece that is titled "Speak to Me in Your Way So I Can Hear You" is this larger figure, which is sitting in the foreground. The armature is made from driftwood. I live right next to the Hudson River here in the Hudson Valley. And these are pieces that were pulled from the Hudson River. And then it's really a cloak that drapes over this armature that is made from a recycled army blanket, and then glass beads, artificial sinew, metal jingles, nylon fringe, and then the head is what is the high fire glazed ceramic. There's 5 of these larger figures that exist. They were made all in 2015, and I really think of them as these kind of spirit figures. I guess there's a lot of transition happening in my practice over the last decade. And during this time, I was doing a lot of meditation and prayer, trying to figure out which directions to go. And these 4 phrases came to me in a series of dreams that probably lasted for about a month, you know, just in terms of that period of time. And so this one, "Speak to Me in Your Way So I Can Hear You," was interesting and is very much about listening. This is sort of the lessons that I learned from these dreams. It's about listening to the person in front of you and making sure that you were saying things in a way that they could actually understand what you were saying. So they were kind of simple, and it was the first time that I used this ceramic for the heads, and I wanted them to kind of feel like kind of worn and torn figures that had kind of been walking. So they're meant to feel a bit skeletal, but also pretty indulgent. Okay, we can move to the next one. This is one of the wall hangings from 2016 titled Alive. It's all beadwork, what you're seeing there in the center, and they're all crow beads. So if you're familiar with beadwork, they are, just under about 1/4 inch in diameter, these beads. So this in total is about 100 inches tall, just to give you some sense of scale. So what is that, about 8 feet, a little over 8 feet tall. The jingles are something that I was using a lot at the time. I still use jingles. Most of my materials at this time were really coming from vendors from the powwow circuit. So our biggest vendor does show up in person on a powwow trail, but most of our materials are ordered online at this point. There's also steel studs. Again, it's using a repurposed blanket underneath it, which is what everything is kind of sewn to. And then the fringe, which you would normally see on a shawl or a fancy dance shawl or on a traditional shawl. We have actually begun using it in such huge quantities here in the studio. And oftentimes people ask me why I use the word we. And I should say I do work with a studio team of about 13 people here in the studio who help produce everything. Everything gets made here in this building. You can go to, I should also, sorry, the text, I am alive, you are alive, they are alive, we are living. And then it's repeated. And this piece was, the phrase, actually, the words were drafted by me when I was commissioned by the Diptychs in Palm Springs, which was their inaugural biennial. And it was meant to sit in front of the mountains, and it was meant to address the mountains as alive, but also the people there, the indigenous people there, as also being alive. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I am, almost in all of my work, I use geometric abstraction. This is an acrylic painting on canvas, and if you look closely in there, you'll see both a rabbit and a fox in the geometry, and sometimes that central triangle, or it's just not a triangle, but this diamond shape in the very center, this orange one, serves as the nose of the rabbit. And then if you look slightly to the left and to the right, there's 2 other orange triangles that serve as the eyes. And then there are rabbit ears in this face. I don't know that anyone else sees the rabbit and the fox, but within geometric abstraction, which you'll see a lot in both traditional and even pre-Columbian painting and beadwork and design work, in indigenous material cultures, you'll see it. And so it's just something that probably around 2000 and I'm gonna guess probably 2004 or 5, I started kind of comparing the way geometry was used in both modernist paintings and then the way that it was used within indigenous painting. And I just got really obsessed with why this comparison about one being sort of a storytelling mechanism and one being purely formal had never been compared. And then since then, I just continued to work with geometry in all of the paintings and the beadwork. Everything is always going to be based on a grid for most of those things. And yeah, so this is from a series of paintings in 2017. Next slide. So this one, this play between geometry and then organic shape. So what's in the center here is a full deer hide, and then this geometric kind of these giant geometric triangles that create a pattern behind the text. And then I wanted to create something that really radiated from that irregularity of the deer hide. And so all of these brass and steel and copper tacks kind of radiate out from the center. This piece is quite large, it's quite heavy. It's on, I think, 3/4 inch plywood. And the text is from a Kate Bush song, and it says, "I know you have a lot of strength left." And then just using color, I wanted to shift it so you could also read, "I have strength left." And the song is Woman's Work by Kate Bush. We can go to the next slide. So video is something that has really let's see, I initially got into video because I was being asked to include work in exhibitions in Indian communities and also on reservations where there wasn't always a budget for shipping. There wasn't always a budget for insurance. And these are usually non-collecting institutions. And so as a way of getting around that, I thought, I should start working in video because I could send it digitally, and even the technology to be able to show a video is something that we might be able to arrange. This piece, One Becomes the Other, was commissioned by the Denver Art Museum, and it was the first standalone video work. I had worked in video before, but not really trying to create an artwork that would just exist by itself. It's quite a long video, and what you're looking at here are actually the three women on the left, Virginia Allrunner, Cheyenne Allrunner, and I can't quite remember the woman to the right. And then to the right of that is Sarah Ortegon. And Sarah Ortegon and I have worked together since then. But this is them getting ready. The idea of the video was really to shift the roles of the viewer and the collection. So we had the performers going in and singing and speaking to objects in the collection. And then at the end of the video, we bring the objects out of the collection storage and we do a small kind of powwow singing and performing and dancing for the objects. And this video, I would say, it really has stood up for me in terms of like it being my first video. I look back on it and I'm really very thrilled with what we were able to produce. We had about 30 members from the powwow community come. Everybody brought their own regalia. Some people were actual descendants of the families who owned the objects in the collection. So we don't script anything. I tend to kind of talk with everybody scene to scene, day to day, and try to explain what it is we're trying to achieve. But I'm really thrilled with this. And since then, I think I'm in the process of working on my fifth standalone video. So it's actually become a significant part of my practice. And those are just videos that are really meant to explore narrative. We do a lot of video documenting performances and other people performing as well as part of projects. Okay, next slide. This is another scene. Again, this is Sarah Ortegon. She's Eastern Shoshone. And she, again, is wearing her own regalia. She's speaking to a belt. And the idea was to speak to the objects as living. And that really came a part of my thinking back in the early 90s, really, when I was in my undergrad at the Art Institute of Chicago. And I was working as a NAGPRA research assistant at the Field Museum. And to have the tribal delegations come in and to treat all of the objects as living beings and to really shift my thinking to look at them as living beings was such a huge shift in terms of my relationship to art making, in terms of my relationship to objects. And this video, because of NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Repatriation Act, I was really thrilled that John Lukovic at the Denver Art Museum really advocated for me to be able to bring people into collections. There was a lot of hoops to jump through, but they were very supportive, and I'm really thrilled that we were able to make this. This is actually shot in one of the galleries, one of the painting galleries at the museum. Next slide. This is another scene. This is a group of dancers who are part of the Denver powwow community. And I think most people knew each other who came. We had probably about 50 people sign up. In total, shooting took about a solid week. I think we had 10 days, but we really had to shoot around the opening hours of the museum. So what you're looking at here is we're shooting in kind of a small amphitheater room where we hosted the powwow, and we had a drum group there who would, sorry, I'm just going to turn my brightness up, who would perform different songs, different regional songs for people to dance to. And then hopefully maybe we'll be able to make the video available for people that they can see it at some other point. Okay, the next slide. So this was a wonderful opportunity that I didn't really expect, but I got a call probably about 2 years ago maybe even a little more than 2 years ago, from Dorothy Moss at the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, DC. And they had a performance series, and she asked me, would I accept a commission for a new performance? And I was so excited that we got to work right away. We had a relatively short timeline, and I oftentimes appropriate text from music lyrics, poetry, quotes, interviews, and I draft my own text as well. I author my own text. So the first one that really came to me was She Speaks Up to Take Them Down, which was happening during Dr. Blasey Ford's testimony. And I was actually doing another performance in Washington, DC that night. And it just really struck me, this idea of naming somebody based on their action taken. And so I started kind of drafting all of these other names. I call them names. So you can see they identify as she, he imagines a future, she tears down walls, she moves their body, their spirits are present, they speak their language. And so these different ways of naming people for not what their birth given name is, but sort of like things that they have done. And then this was the first kind of larger drumming performance that I did. And this has been performed 2 other times, once at the Esker Foundation in Calgary, and then once again at the New Museum in New York City. You can go to the next slide. So this is another one, They Make Her Story. And these are really, it's been kind of like a great training. Like this one we met the day of, we meet at sort of like 9 a.m. We do a lot of voice training, trying to get people to like really project their voice and to feel very confident and entitled in what they're saying. This space was also amazing. This space is where Abraham Lincoln spoke, and there's a window, I think in the previous slide, there's a window behind where he gave a significant speech from. This also served as a hospital during the war. So it's this space where, you know, the National Portrait Gallery was really looking to find ways to represent communities that hadn't, or individuals that hadn't been represented previously. And so this was my response to that. And I'm really thankful for all the people who showed up. It's all volunteer based. The volunteers, we send out a call and people come forward and they show up day of. It's a very, very intense day, but really, really wonderful. Next slide. You can see here. So this is where Abraham Lincoln gave his speech from. And we had 50 drummers in total. Each person comes up to the microphone and they say their name into the microphone, and then they step back and they join everybody who is drumming in unison. And then toward the end of the performance, each person will come forward and exit. I will call them forward, actually. They exit, and then they exit the stage until you just are left with one drummer. Next slide. So this is the painting that's currently in Larger Than Memory, Brighter Days. And Brighter Days is a song that I remember from, let me see, from the early 90s. And, you know, for me, I graduated, just to age myself, I graduated high school in 1990. And so my younger college years were in the early 90s. And I came out as a gay man when I was probably about 19. Obviously, I think I knew, of course, knew that before then, but that's when I publicly came out. And I was going to gay clubs, dance clubs, and there would be this, you know, house music, disco music, and the lyrics always seemed to me to be so celebratory. And I couldn't really, you know, the AIDS crisis was at a height at the time, and I was disconnected from that generation of LGBTQ plus people who were losing their entire communities. And I was a teenager, a 20-year-old going there just to dance. And so probably in my, I guess, late 30s, mid 30s, I started looking at those lyrics and trying to figure out why was this the music that was being played when there was such sadness and mourning happening in those communities. And I started kind of looking at those lyrics more. So this one says, pick me up, oh, won't you lift me up? Pick me up, oh, won't you lift me up? Brighter days. And so, and to hear it, it's actually quite, it's almost like someone really screaming and crying out for help. And so, you know, put it to like a dance beat, it has a very different feel. But when you really look at the lyrics, there is a lot about community and coming together and looking for support, asking for help, and also a lot of mourning and talking about what was going on at the time. So next slide, please. This is a more recent piece from 2020. The first diptych drum, I believe, came about in 2019. And, you know, so my love is painting. My training is as a painter. And going back and being able to work on large canvases brings me so much joy. Working on hide is an amazing experience because hide is such a beautiful material to paint on. It is so smooth, it has zero resistance. It's also, you know, it's not like ubiquitous cotton canvas. Every hide is different. And so the idea with the diptych drums is I think about two individuals that complete each other. And so totally inspired by Perfect Lovers by Felix Gonzalez Torres, where there's two clocks that are started at the same time, and just due to inconsistencies, eventually they fall out of sync. So the idea that things look very similar, but ultimately remain distinctly different is what I do with these. And it's really, the hide allows me to do that in person. The slight variations that happen in the hide, where there's darker sections, you'll see hair follicles, you'll see pores, you'll see scars. So then you put them in these frames and they just become these kind of perfect kind of modernist paintings, and you don't really think about the drum at all. But that's the thing I like. And then when you're in person and you step up to them, you really get a sense that they're not, you know, they're not paintings on canvas at all. Mm-hmm. Next slide. This is from a painting from 2020. I got to get a hold of myself. Now, 2020 was a strange time for all of us, but this is one of the paintings that got put on hold pretty quickly. And by that, I mean it was meant to be exhibited and then wasn't exhibited with my gallery here in New York. But I got to get a hold of myself. And I, you know, honestly, during these past, like even longer, like, you know, 5-7 years, just this increasing feeling of anxiety. I mean, I am an educator. I've been teaching for nearly 20 years at this point. And being an Indigenous teacher and my own education as an Indigenous artist, you know, with a lot of programs, it's just incredibly lacking, you know? And so I think the idea of trying to find language that speaks to trying to center yourself, trying to remain focused, trying to continue moving forward, but also language that when someone else reads it, they can project their own story onto it, is something that that I look for when I'm collecting language. Next slide. The punching bag series, which has been ongoing since 2012. I think actually the first one was shown in 2013. This one is Playing with Fire, and from 2019. This piece I love. It was a big shift. This fringe here is so thick when we, in the studio, when it's tied on, the grid that we're working with is literally a 1/4 inch grid. So obviously when you're in a museum, you can't just touch it. But if you were in the studio, I would say you could touch it. And it's like the thickest, most luxurious fringe. And we needed it that thick so that, because I had this idea of being able to continue the geometric abstraction into the fringe. So we need a lot of fringe to be able to cut and have these kind of blocks of color. Mm-hmm. So this was the first one where I had that idea. We tried it out. People always ask, how long does it take to make a punching bag? I would say normally it takes about 3 months. I would say this one took about 5 months. Mm-hmm. That's with 1 to 2 people working on it full time. But I just really, really love the way that they come out. Next slide. This is a very, very new piece. I was meant to have a show that opened in Los Angeles with Robert's Projects in May. And due to COVID, everything got kind of reworked. And now the show will be opening in January. My studio team began immediately working from home. And so, you know, this figure is not as big as the other ones. When it says it's 70.5 inches, that's including the nearly 4 foot tall block that it's sitting on. in actuality, the figure itself is about 30, I believe it's 36 inches tall. So everything is hand beaded. These figures are made from an acrylic felt, and then everything gets hand tacked on there. So, and you can see how everything kind of collapses into each other. So these are brass sequins. These are brass bells. In the center, that spiral is glass beads on the hands, and then this idea that I wanted to do glass bead fringe. So the legs or the pants are all glass beads as well. Oh, and I should also say this is the first time, this is from a new series of 3 figures that were just completed. And so this one, Huma Hicha, sorry, I'm just learning Choctaw now, but I believe Lakna, that's what it is. So Huma Hicha Lakna. And it basically means red and gold, red and yellow, gold and yellow. And that's in Choctaw, which is my tribal affiliation. And my dad speaks Choctaw. I was not raised speaking Choctaw. And so I wanted with these figures in a weird way to like be more specific, you know, because I work from a very intertribal aesthetic, which is something that I've grown up with seeing in powwows, but this idea of cultural specificity has become increasingly more important, and language seemed to be the easiest way to kind of enter into this. So right now I'm just working with color. And these, as compared to the larger figures, I really wanted them to relate more to dolls. And that just really has to do with them working as kind of teaching tools. Next slide. This was the title piece for the show that's going to open it in January. It can be said of them. So the top part is beadwork. It's stitched down onto an acrylic felt, and then it's all fringe. Again, this fringe took, my gosh, probably 7 or 8 weeks just to do the fringe, and then takes about 2 weeks to cut it. And it can be said of them actually is a title from a Sister Corita Kent print. And that was a print that was made, I believe, in '69. And she was referring at that time to different civil rights leaders. And she was referring to the kind of qualities that could be attributed to these leaders of the civil rights movement. And this particular exhibition, I wanted to focus on leaders in terms of conversations around identity and gender. And so I decided to borrow that title, It Can Be Said of Them, which is the title of the show as well. Next slide. Oh, you guys are so lucky you're going to get to see Laura perform. Laura Ortman is one of my absolute favorite collaborators, people, musicians, artists. She is standing on top of my sculpture at Socrates Sculpture Park, which is up currently, titled Because Once You Enter My House, It Becomes Our House. And I wanted to make a structure that it's like a large ziggurat, and it references the mound builder culture of Mississippian culture that the Mississippi Choctaw would have emerged from. Obviously mine is covered with really kind of hallucinogenic psychedelic patterning and texts that say, "A number is too big to ignore, respect Indigenous land, the future is present and powerful because we're different." And part of the activation of this monument is to invite different Indigenous performers to come and activate it. And Laura Ortman was the first one. So this is just one of the amazingly beautiful images that came out of this performance. And the video will be online, I believe in January. We'll be releasing all the videos of the full performances. But yeah, don't miss her performance. She's amazing. Next slide.
I think that's our last one.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I thought we would do now is just have a conversation. One thing that you brought up is your background in painting and your training in painting. And that got me to thinking more about just sort of your experience in art school. You went to, as you said, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago for your bachelor's and the Royal College of Art in London for your master's. What was that experience like? And did you feel that sort of your point of view and the mediums and the concepts you wanted to explore were supported by the faculty, or did you feel that you were having to work within the frameworks that were existent in those schools?
I was really lost, to be honest. Like I knew I wanted to be an artist. I had drawn, I was the kid who was always drawing and sending drawings to my family members and stuff. And in high school, led like an art club, and we traveled to New York and saw exhibitions. But I think the idea of what it means to pursue being an artist was totally foreign to me.
Mhm.
And so I actually got kicked out of my first college, which was the University of Maryland. And I credit that to not knowing what I wanted to do and not
Yeah.
knowing how to go about it. And so I got a lovely letter at the end of the first year saying, sorry, we're not asking you back. And that was awful. And I went home and I told my dad, like, just please let me go to a community college and prove to you that I'm not lazy. And I went to this community college in Prince George's County, community college. I had amazing teachers, and I was the kid who was in that department like 24 hours a day,
Wow.
drawing, photographing, painting. And when it came time and I got my associate's degree, I asked my favorite professor there, Barbara Johnson, I said, where should I go? And she said, you want to go to the Art Institute of Chicago. And it was actually between the Art Institute of Chicago and IAIA. So I did an apprenticeship out in Nambe that summer. And then I ended up choosing to go to the Art Institute of Chicago. It was a wonderful time. It was super cheap. It was really free. But when I started working at the Field Museum, and I believe my previous boss is on this call. So if that was you, Janice, hello. That's great to see. But it outweighed my experience at the SAIC by far. I was working at the museum anywhere from 3 to 4 days a week, and that exposure to collections, to the conversations that were happening there, there was no way of resolving them in my head with painting at the time. So it was like pure content just coming at you all the time. A lot of confusion, a lot of frustration, a lot of voices at SAIC telling me that I should stop working at the museum because it was distracting from my studies. But I just knew it was important, and I knew that it was what was really feeding me at the time. And I also got a lot of support from people there, and just in terms of thinking about these ideas as an artist. So when it came time to go to graduate school, I really didn't know what to do. My plan was to move to New York and pursue being an artist, and I didn't know what that meant, and I admitted that to myself. And fortunately, I'd been in conversation with Chief Philip Martin in Mississippi, and I met with him, and he said, you know what, we're gonna help you. If you get into a program, we're gonna help you. And I got into the Royal College of Art, and ultimately they paid for 3 years for me to live in London and to attend graduate school. Totally unforeseen. There's no way of me quantifying how or why that's what happened. But, he really just said, he was like, look, your job is to go out in the world and be successful. And what you do has no place here. I remember him saying that very clearly. He said, what you do belongs out in the world. And always carry with you your pride in being Choctaw. And so I think a lot of people don't know that about me, but, and, my family lives there. But Royal College was very similar. I had zero input or ability to communicate with people. I did actually connect with Hélène Cixous, who is a French feminist philosopher in France, who became sort of a mentor to me. To this day, we continue talking. And I think I had to find my own way, basically. I think there was a lot of frustration, but ultimately finding my own way. When living in London, though, I have to say, being able to take a break from the identity politics of the United States of that time, of the early 90s, was really what I needed to do. Like, I needed to be able to put it down long enough to figure out who I was and what I was interested in. So that's where it was helpful, and exposure to a lot of things that I otherwise would not have experienced.
Absolutely. Well, and sort of back to the comment you said about your work belongs in the world and not it maybe directly in your community. You've said that the personal is political, and this idea of you and other contemporary Indigenous artists or performers or makers are there to remind and sort of create record or evidence of their existence. in a contemporary way and in this way of continuum. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in a weird way, I wish it wasn't. I wish all
Yeah.
of our places weren't so politicized. And I wish that I felt totally comfortable and entitled to live my life the way that I want. And that's where, you know, it kind of gets reaffirmed when it's like, oh, there's people who don't like me. There's people who are completely unaware of me, completely unaware of the Mississippi Choctaw, completely unaware of Mississippian culture. And, you know, at this point, I don't feel like it's my job to educate people, because I realize that one, that's inherent in my work, right? And it really falls on the shoulder of the individual. Like, there's information out there, and if we want to access it and take it into our lives and apply it, that's up to us. I can't make anyone do anything. So so for me, I've just decided to see museums, the art world, biographical narratives, exhibitions, catalogs, image distribution, image making as a platform for me to both like indulge in and explore like truly things that really I'm obsessed with. You know, it's literally me doing and making the work that I want to see exist in the world. And I like to say if somebody else was making it, I wouldn't do it, but I do also really love doing it. So
Well, and some of the works that probably some of our viewers have seen and identify most with as part of your practice are the heavy bags. We saw one image earlier in the discussion, but you said that they sort of were born out of this idea of a representation of struggle and power. Can you tell us a little bit more about when you were like, oh, I really want to bead and fringe and put tin jingles on an Everlast punching bag?
yeah, well, it actually goes back to the Field Museum, which was in collections. I remember they had a shelf of kind of unidentified objects that were either tribally unaffiliated or they were unidentified. And I remember always kind of looking at the objects that were in that section. And I don't remember exactly how I came across a beaded whimsy, but you know, whimsies were something that were produced in the Niagara Falls region at the turn of the century by Iroquois beaders who were doing traditional raised beadwork, but in the patterns of paisley and florals coming from Europe. And they were trying to appeal to Victorian taste. And ultimately, I think what they produced, this is my presumption, but what they produced was not Indian enough to be valued, and it wasn't Victorian enough to be valued. So it became these kind of kitsch novelty items that were bought and sold. For me, I feel like that really represented me. You know, it's like something that's like stuck in the middle and kind of isn't doing really what it's intended to do. So it kind of gets stuck in this stasis. And I felt like that. And then let's jump forward almost 15 years later, or more than that, almost 25 years later. I'm struggling in New York, trying to come to terms with continuing to pursue being an artist. I think I was super high functioning. I was working a lot of jobs. I was supporting myself. I was exhibiting. I think I had sold some work and gotten some grants, but really frustrated. And someone recommended that I go talk to a counselor. And I did. And I walked in there so confidently thinking that like I'd be walking out of it in 45 minutes. Like, I don't need this. And all of this stuff came up so quickly about racism, homophobia, classism in the art world specifically, and why it kind of triggered me so much. And that counselor recommended that I work with a physical trainer as a way to kind of bring mind and body together. And she is the one who introduced me to boxing as a way to kind of exercise frustration and anger. And it was interesting. She was like, you know, who do you want to punch? Who are you angry at? Name it, punch this bag. And I realized that all of those, you know, racism, homophobia, classism, they're all societal circumstances, right? They're not individuals necessarily. And somehow in my brain, those whimsies popped up. Now the whimsies tend to be sort of like these things that kind of hang and they're adorned heavily. And I just thought, you know, I just wanted to turn this punching bag into a really large whimsy. And that was the beginning of it. And the first one took about 1.5 years to produce because I had no idea what I was doing. It seemed so crazy to start adorning a punching bag. And when I showed it for the first time in 2013, it was at the Museum of Art and Design here in New York City. And people just connected. People understood this power relationship that's represented in this punching bag and in fighting and in achieving. And that's really where it started. And it continues to this day to be really one of the best formats I've ever found to kind of trigger that relationship and then play within those parts, those roles in that relationship. They're so different now than they were the very first one. But the very first one, I haven't seen it in a while. I saw it actually a couple of years ago, and it has an urgency to it that the ones now have an extreme confidence in them. But that first one is like needed to be made, you know?
Yeah. Well, and in terms of, you know, the experience you had of trying to find your sort of path and the way in which you've navigated the art world and your career within that space, what advice would you give to young artists and makers who are just now either emerging from their BFAs and MFAs, or maybe are doing it without sort of that formalized educational experience, but want to move to New York or LA or some other urban art center to make it as an artist in their respective way? What advice would you bestow upon them in that journey?
Well, first of all, I guess there's a couple of things. One, it is just really, really hard. Like, I mean, I would never lie to anyone about that. It is, and you feel like you're risking looking like a fool. You know, you're risking like how many weeks do I do this? How many months do I do this? How many years do I do this? How many decades do I do this? And you don't know when something's going to break, you know? Yeah. And so I started having success in my 40s. And people will, you know, I remember my first dealer said to me, "This is wonderful because you have a body of work that I get to introduce to people. So you're not like a 20-something-year-old who's like, what will he be doing in 10 years? You're 40 years old and we're like, look at this last 10 years of what he's done. Why what he's making right now makes sense. Like he arrived here. He didn't just invent this on the spot." And so it is just really hard because for those 10 years, trust me, or more than 10 years, for those 20 years, I was really thinking like, what in the world am I doing? And what do I think, where do I think I'm going to be in, you know, 20 years from now? So that's one thing. The other thing is that what I was saying before about listening, you know, again, it took me until my 40s to learn that idea that it's like when, no matter how critical someone sounds, if they're taking the time to talk to you, they, I would argue, probably are really trying to say something to you. Like, so just shut your ego down long enough to absorb what it is they're saying. You can take it or leave it after that. For the most part, they're giving you an honest picture of what a part of the art world is thinking, you know? And I think a lot of times artists think that, that, you know, the art world, it is just what it is. Like you don't get to call the shots in it. Like you work really hard to participate in it, to play in it. It is not fair. It is not a meritocracy. Everything that you could criticize it for is, I would probably argue, is probably pretty valid. On the other hand, from my experience, and I've worked lots of jobs, and like I said, I've been an educator for a really long time, I've never found anything that offers me the kind of autonomy and freedom of what I get to do as an artist. And it's kind of what marries me to it.
Yeah, it's worth it.
Yeah.
With all the heartache and struggle and confusion that, you know, creatives, artists, and even curators and young scholars doing their PhDs looking at the landscape of contemporary art right now, I think that it can be very daunting, but I think it's so important. And a few weeks, like I said, about a week ago, just anecdotally, the exhibition, for people who haven't seen it yet or who haven't read much about the show, the title of the exhibition was drawn from one of Joy Harjo's poems, Grace, in which she says there's something larger than the memory of a dispossessed people. We have seen it. And so larger than memory comes from that line. And she had come to the museum because the museum was honoring her for her work as a poet. And she and I were just briefly speaking about this time of, lockdown and now sort of post-lockdown, and this idea of what it means to be an essential worker or not. And I think, sort of historically, people have thought of the arts as non-essential, as a frivolity, or something just as entertainment. But I think what we've all really realized throughout this time is the art is so pivotal and integral to our experience as human beings. And when we have limited access to it, I think we really feel it in a negative way. So I just want to say thank you for the work that you do. It's really inspiring, and I think it inspires a lot of other people.
Thank you.
So I guess now we will open it up to a few questions from our audience.
All right. Yep. If you want to go ahead and submit your questions, you can do so in the comments or in the Q&A function. And we'll just wait a moment for that. And yeah, thank you again, Jeff. I think it's since it's a little bit chillier here in the valley, I think some of our attendees are just kind of nice and bundled up and enjoying the discussion. So a question from David, David Roche, our executive director and CEO. What is your idea of a perfect day?
When everything goes really smoothly, I have to say I feel very, very, very fortunate. I love perfect day. Honestly, I wake up at about 5 a.m. and I get about an hour by myself to just drink coffee before my kids wake up. And I have two kids. I have a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. So when they wake up, that's all our life is about. Until I get out the door. And when I come to the studio, I have such a committed group of people who work here, who are really smart, who treat each other respectfully. It is a wonderful environment to be in. And I've appreciated it so much during quarantine, but also like what we're able to do, here. And so to see everything moving along, I try to leave here at 5 p.m. and there's just this hum of the studio, which is really fantastic. And then I go home and I kind of get to close the door on the studio. I grew up. I was in my 20s in New York and London and Chicago, seeing a lot of crazy, unhappy artists. And I was determined that I wanted to have a functional life that included having a family, being able to make the work that I wanted to make, and being able to feel a sense of stability, which has been a lot in question lately. But generally speaking, I think I feel very fortunate with what I get to do on a day-to-day basis.
I have a question here from Janice, Janice Klein. She says, many contemporary artists are asked or feel the need to include artist statement with their work. Can you speak a little to the challenges that this poses for Native artists?
Yeah. Thank you, Janice. Absolutely. It's, the thing about, and I have to admit, Erin has never asked me this, so I appreciate that. But has never asked me to explain my work in a way that it sort of justifies why a Native American artist would make what they make. I have never been asked by the Heard Museum to relate this to a familial linear narrative about making. I really feel like at the Heard I've always been treated very much like it's right because you made it, and that's why we invited you to take part in something. I think for a lot of Native artists, we feel responsible, and I have felt this before, to be the educator, and so we're almost doing the job of the docent or doing the job of the curator sometimes, or of the education department, because many of our tribal histories, individual histories is something that they're not familiar with, And so it falls on our shoulders to make sure that and I think that we feel very committed to our own communities, if I use the wrong Choctaw word, I'm not going to be responding to somebody other than someone else who speaks Choctaw, which is a very limited group of people, you know? So I think it's, and I've really tried to resist that. I really try to put the pressure on my galleries and on people who I work with to do the work of finding ways to interpret the work in ways that it hasn't been spoken about before. And that's what I tell a lot of young Indigenous artists, is that it's their responsibility to ask for that and to sometimes demand it.
Okay, we have a few more questions. I think we'll go ahead and answer 2 more. So I apologize if we don't get to this in the discussion, but let's see, from Trudy Wiesenberger, when and where did you say "It Can Be Said of Them" opens? Did Curator Kent influence you in any other ways?
The show "It Can Be Said of Them" will open in January in Los Angeles at Roberts Projects. And Curator Kent is such a huge influence. The first time I learned about her was in 2006. And I was just blown away just by the prints. It was before even learning about who she was or any of the narrative of her as an individual. And then when I learned about her as an individual, and I collect Curator. So I think we have in our home, I wake up and we sit under Curator that says "People Like Us." Her language has shown up in a lot of things, and I love tracing where she found the language at, but I always credit my discovery of that language through Curator and then like to expand on it from there. But yeah, she's such a huge, and in fact, I'm in conversation with the Curator Art Center. We have a very ongoing, very communicative relationship talking about pairing our work together in different ways in the future.
Okay, here's a question from E. Peterson Hall. He first says, "Thank you, Jeffrey. Interested in how you see art as an embodiment of the continuity of the craft and tradition. Do you anticipate or hope that the connection with Choctaw will result in more use of that language in your art, almost as an extension of preserving an oral tradition?"
I guess I'll go to the second part of the question, where the answer is yes. You know, the idea of learning a language that, you know, okay, so the reason why I was not taught Choctaw, both of my parents, my mother's Cherokee, my father's Choctaw, were the children of Southern Baptist ministers in Oklahoma and Mississippi. They both went to boarding schools where they were not able to speak their language. So it was their first language. Then they went to boarding school where they couldn't speak it. And then my dad joined the Army. And so we didn't live in a Choctaw community after that. And I think the reason why I was not taught Choctaw was simply because my dad wanted me to be highly functioning and successful in a non-Choctaw speaking world. And so I've seen him deal with issues of self-consciousness and shame around being Choctaw. We've talked about it. He's still with us. But I think my decision to come back to learn Choctaw has to do with it plays a role in who I am as an artist now, genuinely. It's not about me trying to recreate the past. It's about me trying to be more specific in the present, if that makes sense, which is kind of what I was always hoping for in terms of coming to learning language or being able to use Choctaw narratives in the work. So I hope so. I think it will. It's just the way my brain works. You know, I kind of, even the piece at Socrates is the first time I've really addressed something to do with Mississippian culture. And then I've received an invitation to come and do a site-specific project with the mounds.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just ask one more question, and then for any of those that maybe weren't answered, we'll just follow up with you after the event. So from one of our attendees, they asked, what is the background of the people who assist you creating your work? How do you find them, or do they find you?
Initially, when I moved to this area, I started teaching at Bard College, a small liberal arts college here in Annandale. Yeah. And so that's about 20 minutes from where I'm at right now. And that was where the students initially started. I started hiring some students from. And since then, it's become sort of like friends of friends, and the whole area has really shifted. So they tend to be in their 20s. Maybe some of them are coming up into their young 30s. But at this point, it's literally people moving here who are familiar with the studio. We oftentimes get emails from people asking, you know, if they can intern or if they can work here. A lot of people who are very interested in handcraft.
Well, great. Thank you, everyone. It is 1 o'clock our time now, so we'll go ahead and wrap up the discussion. Thank you again. We will be putting a recording of this discussion on our YouTube channel. That'll be up at the end of this week. We do have a playlist for all of the other virtual panels, so you can just find that into YouTube, searching on the link up playlist. And if you have any other questions, email for that on all of you. And thank you. You all have a chance to come see the show in the next few months. And thank you again, Jeff. Really appreciate your taking your time and talking to our attendees today.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you everyone for watching.